The recent release of Deadpool and Wolverine saw a ton of fantastic multiversal cameos and variants share their time in the spotlight. While severed beloved heroes got their time to shine, one of the coolest inclusions was the debut of the Deadpool Corps, a legion of Deadpool variants who were all bent on stopping R. Wade and Logan from defeating Cassandra Nova and saving Wade's timeline. Although the cameo was brief, we did get a glimpse into the Deadpool variant known as Headpool, the severed head of a Deadpool variant from an unconfirmed Earth. Though luckily for us, we do know about his comic counterpart. This theory goes even further though, and suggests that we've actually seen this version on screen before. So stick with us, fellow superheroes in training, and today, let's talk about one of the Deadpool variants that we all swore we would never bring up again. The variant in question is the version that many fans have now deemed Baraka-pool after the Mortal Kombat character due to his striking resemblance. This is the version that we first saw all the way back in X-Men Origins Wolverine. And at the beginning of the film, he was a rather faithful and pretty close adaptation to the character of Deadpool, at least at first. He was still obviously a far cry from what we have now, but in the opening montage, he quipped and joked like a Deadpool variant would. He was an adept swordsman and combatant who was fairly accurate given the point in time in which he debuted. But it was the end of the film, however, where things got weird. This is the very same version that notoriously had his mouth shut and the retractable blades protruding from his arms, not too dissimilar from Wolverine. After having been experimented on by Stryker to create the perfect weapon, he showcased several other latent mutant abilities, including Cyclops' optic blasts and John Wraith's ability to teleport. And this was because he was actually a hybrid of several mutants, all that Stryker had captured and experimented on. The idea behind this variant was that he was an amalgam of different mutant powers all blended into one mindless killing machine, a killing machine that was later decapitated. And this is where we find the bones of this theory. Is it possible that the severed head of Baraka-pool would later become Headpool in Deadpool and Wolverine? Let's explore. First, we have to address the most prominent flaw with this theory, which is Wade's infamous healing factor. At the beginning of the fight, it is shown that Deadpool in this series of events has the very same healing factor as Wolverine, and we know that this version of Deadpool did survive, since the post-credit scene of Wolverine X-Men Origins shows his hand reaching out for his severed head. The head then subsequently wakes up itself, and the implication is of course that this version is being primed for a return, and that Baraka-pool is not dead at the end of X-Men Origins. This seems to indicate that both Wade's body and his head both independently survived, and that Baraka-pool was either able to reattach his head, or that his head or body could regrow another head or body entirely. So then, why would he remain just a severed head? Something would have had to happen to hamper Wade's healing factor here and stop him from either regrowing a new body or reattaching the head to his old body. Right now, we don't have any firm evidence from what or where he may have been, so we'll have to look in the comics, starting off with comic Headpool's origin. In the original Headpool story, it was a zombie virus that destroyed his healing factor, but Deadpool's head was still conscious and actively searching for a new body. In X-Men Origins, we don't know of any notable pathogens that could replicate the same effect, but what we do know is that the final battle took place not just in a nuclear facility, but in an active mutant internment camp. This leads us to two main possibilities that could have been feasible. First, we know that radiation is notoriously dangerous for human cells and can infect a regular person's ability to heal properly, which is theoretically possible, but as of yet unconfirmed. The second, and perhaps more likely of the two theories, is that there is also a myriad of different mutants present, any of whom may have had the ability to dampen other mutant abilities, such as Leech from X-Men The Last Stand. Because of Leech, we know that mutants exist who can dampen the powers of other mutants around them, so if either Leech or someone like Leech was being held in the camp, then something may have happened to nullify Headpool's ability to reattach his head. The main issue with this theory, though, is that Emma Frost and several other mutants all demonstrate their powers during the escape sequence, which leads us to wonder why they wouldn't have also been affected if there was a mutant like Leech somewhere in the crowd. We will openly admit that this is the most difficult aspect of the theory to remedy, so if you have any better solutions for either of these, please let us know down below, because we would be fascinated to hear your take. The only other semi-feasible explanation that we could come up with, though, is that when Logan's claws got superheated by Baraka-pool's optic blasts, that they somehow replicated the effects of the Muramasa blade, which can famously stop healing factors from taking effect in the comics. We will openly admit, though, that this is a long stretch, so as of right now, this one infuriating aspect of the theory will not fit. If Baraka-pool and Headpool are the same, then why did his head not reattach to his body? If this can be overlooked though, then there's a decent chance that this variant of Deadpool eventually did become Headpool. And we can see that his mouth was open in the final shot of the film. This meant that he was no longer sealed and would have the freedom to quip and joke like his former self did, as long as he was able to overcome his conditioning and return to some small shell of his former self, which we know was much more accurate to the Deadpool that we know and love. And Weapon 11, or Baraka-pool, was a big departure. Right now, our personal favorite version of this theory is that both the head and the body survived, but something kept them from reattaching themselves together, which would mean that Deadpool's body would have been tasked with carrying his head around wherever he went. Wade could still talk, quip, and think just like Headpool can, but his body can still fight since we see his hand moving over his head in the end credits. So perhaps his body protected his head for a while after the events of X-Men Origins. From here, he could have figured out a way to construct the flying cap that we see in both the comics and in the film. So now that he doesn't need his body to continually carry him around, and eventually, the two may have actually parted ways. We know that this Wade was nothing more than a slave to Stryker, a drone that he could pilot remotely by simply typing commands into a machine. Since the facility was destroyed though, and more importantly, now that Stryker is no longer piloting Wade, then he may have been free to begin exploring how to regain his humanity. This version may have been on a journey to undo his conditioning, sort of like a twisted take on Bucky's journey and attempt to deprogram himself from the Winter Soldier program. Before we go much further though, there are a few flaws with this theory that we need to address in order to make this idea work. The first of which is Deadpool's voice. Headpool was voiced by none other than Nathan Fillion, and his voice was noticeably different from Ryan Reynolds, but this is probably the easiest flaw to correct. After all, Logan decapitated this variant, slashing through his vocal cords and destroying his throat in the process. And as we stated earlier, there is some reason why this Deadpool can't heal properly, regardless of whether or not we know exactly why. The voice change is quite easy, but I hear you saying that Baraka-pool is well and truly dead. This claim comes from the post-credit scene of Deadpool 2, where we see Deadpool jumping around different points in the timeline and history in order to correct his own. In the post-credit scene, we see Wade go back in time to execute Baraka-pool before his fight with Wolverine. But unfortunately for him, however, we know that that's not how time works in the MCU. By doing this, he just created a deviant timeline where this Wade died prematurely, but the events of Origins still exist somewhere as long as the timeline hasn't been eradicated entirely. The only way to truly kill the complete existence of Baraka-pool like Wade was trying to do is to prune the reality where it took place. And so far, we have no evidence to suggest that this happened. Even if this wasn't the case, Wade killed Baraka-pool by shooting him through the head. And given everything we know about Deadpool, this is far from a permanent death. Like it or not, this version of the character showcased a healing factor on par with Logan because it was literally taken from Logan in this version, so he would have healed regardless of how funny the scene actually was. Somewhere out there in the multiverse, whether it's after the events of Origins or after the events of Deadpool 2's post-credit scene, there is some sort of Baraka-pool variant still floating around in the universe somewhere, which is an aspect of Marvel that I love. The idea that there's a story out there somewhere with a disgraced Deadpool that we could one day see. Overall, however, the one main problem with this theory is the idea that Wade couldn't heal himself after the events of Origins, and this will remain the most persistent thorn in this theory until a solution is presented. So again, I ask you, how would you solve this one problem that seems to be the only thing standing in the way of a genuine, awesome theory? Would you like to see Baraka-pool redeemed as Headpool? And do you think that Headpool did come from X-Men Origins Wolverine? Thanks so much for stopping by the channel today. Hulk smash that subscribe button for more Marvel lore and daily updates, and have a great one.